This is probably the smallest full-frame cinema camera in the world, the sigmafp. Hello, my name is Ole. Welcome to the fourth episode of my sigmafp masterclass. In the previous episodes we have established that the sigmafp is a raw capturing device capable of reproducing up to 12.5 stops of dynamic range. The camera sensor is capturing these stops in a linear way. This is very different to how film stock is reproducing brightness values. Our typical viewing space Rec709 has approximately 6 stops of linear dynamic range. Therefore, we now have to select which 6 out of the total 12.5 stops will be mapped thereinto. The exceeding data will not be used, which at a certain point is likely causing a harsh clipping into either black or white. This is leaving us with an unpleasing result. Now, what do we want to achieve? First of all, we likely want to use all of the data we have captured, and secondly, we want to avoid harsh clipping. All of this can be done by introducing something called a tone mapping curve. The upper part of the curve is called the highlight roll-off, while the bottom part is the shadow roll-off. Since we are now leaving a straight linear reproduction, meaning certain parts of the information will be compressed, all of the captured image data can now be mapped into Rec709 and additionally used to make the transitions towards black and white much smoother. To achieve the smoothest roll-off, you need to select the ISO value, giving you the most stops in that area where you need a roll-off to happen. While developing my LUTs, the ultimate goal was to make use of the full camera's dynamic range, its high color fidelity, which slightly exceeds Rec 2020, leaving the midtones, where skin colors are usually falling into unharmed, and creating as smooth as possible roll-off. Because of the changing highlight and shadow stop distribution in different ISO settings, this goal could only be achieved by creating specific ISO-dependent LUTs with an adjusted tone mapping curve. These Rec709 LUTs additionally have a monitoring counterpart tailored for the Atomis Ninja in order to give you a consistent workflow from capturing to post-production. However, since my LUTs do not have any contrast added on top of the tone mapping curve, it is very likely that for some scenes you will have to add a bit in post. Let us have a look onto the following examples to understand how the different LUTs are working and how powerful the option to add a custom contrast instead of having a burnt-in one can be. Let's have a look on this clip. Final Cut gives us the option to not select any further tone mapping, so we're basically just bringing the footage into something viewable in Rec709. However, this also means that without a tone curve, we have image information exceeding the boundaries of Rec709. In this case, a lot of highlight information is simply pushed outwards. What happens if we increase the brightness to 800? Let's have a look. You see the overall image has gotten quite a bit brighter, but on the other hand, we are pushing even more information outside of Rec709. So let's go to the second clip. In this case, we have debited to Panasonic V-Log and have applied our custom ISO 100 LUT. This one is containing a special tone curve to push all the information of ISO 100 probably into Rec709. But as you can see, since we only have 3 stops of dynamic range over middle gray, this means the highlight transition into the sun is pretty harsh. So let's increase brightness to 800 and allocate more of our stops to the highlights. Now if we select the ISO 800 LUT with the adjusted tone curve, you immediately see that everything falls back into place. And since we are now taking advantage of the more dynamic range over middle gray, we can produce a smoother roll-off. Okay, so let's have a look on the image overall. I think, although we are using pretty much the dynamic range of the camera, that this could still be improved by adding some contrast. Usually, contrast is added around a pivot point of 45 IRE, which is the same place where middle gray falls. So let's try this one first. So we enable our custom LUT select contrast and a pivot point of 45, and dial in some contrast. Okay. I think something like this looks pretty amazing, right? But let's dial that back to 0 for a second. My personal preferences to set contrast is with a higher pivot point, because I don't want to brighten all of the highlight information much further and instead want to push all stuff below much lower. So let's have a look. I think the clouds in this sky are pretty interesting, so I would try to leave them there they are. So in this case, I would have a look on the waveform and see that probably a pivot point of 75 would be a good choice. So let's try that instead. Now dial in some contrast, and you see, yeah, this looks exactly how I would like this image to look like. Now to see the difference, let's for a second go back to 45 IRI. This is with 75, and this is with 45. There's neither right or wrong, so it's just a matter of personal preferences. So let's go to the next clip. The overall exposure looks pretty balanced. As you can see, I didn't have any contrast applied so far, but I think the image could benefit from some. Let's try a contrast pivot point of 45. Enable this and dial in some contrast. I think somewhere around here looks pretty decent. But what I immediately notice is that we have pushed a lot of the clouds way too much into the highlights. So we are losing quite a lot of detail in this case. So let's go back to 0 and to figure out what we could do. Again, as per my personal preferences, I would try to search where the clouds are located in this shot. They seem to be somewhere maximum up to 80 IRI. And since I only want to push a small amount of those into the highlights and everything else down, again, I would try something like a pivot point of 75. Let's do it. And now dial in some contrast. Well, I think this looks amazing, right? And as you can also see, we are getting all the information in the clouds back. This last shot was done in ISO 200. Overall exposure looks pretty balanced, but again I feel it lacks some contrast. So we enable our custom LUT, go with 45 pivot point and dial in some contrast. As you can see, that's working pretty well in this case. However, my personal opinion would be to try something higher as a pivot point. So I would be searching for the brightest parts. In this case, again, 75 IRI sounds reasonable. So let's try that. Let's dial in some contrast. Super. I think this is how I would like this image to be. Thank you for watching. I'm looking forward to see you back on the next episode to discuss what adding a film print emulation can do to your image.